Hi everyone, I'm Chris Fay from writewithfay.com. This presentation is called Writing About Minor Characters Who Are People of Color. First, I want to say that this presentation is not about writing main characters who are people of color, because that takes a lot more care, thought, and research, especially if you're not of the same race as your main character. Although these tips can certainly be used for main characters. This presentation instead is about minor characters, such as the main character's friends, family, coworkers, and passing characters, someone your main character may encounter only once. Also, this is not an exhaustive list of how to write about characters who are people of color if you're white. I'm not an expert. Instead, this is a starting point of do's and don'ts to help you along the way and to encourage you to go further in your research. First, a couple of definitions. Diverse is a representation of different people, race, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, physical ability, mental ability, and religious belief. Just like companies and organizations should strive to create teams that are diverse, and publishers should publish diverse work, authors should make an attempt to create stories that are diverse. But it's not enough to simply create a diverse workplace, or in our case, story. You also need to be inclusive. Inclusive is a set of behaviors that make everyone feel welcome. It's important that we, authors, make all readers feel safe when they're reading our books. If you include offensive descriptions, terms, generalizations, or assumptions, many readers may not feel comfortable reading your book anymore and may not read anything else you publish. This doesn't just go for race, but gender, such as sexism, gender identity, for example, your main character assuming another character's gender based on their looks, and physical ability, also known as ableism. But for the purposes of this presentation, we will be focusing on race. Do describe the skin tone and features of all of your characters, not just your black or brown characters. Yes, this means to describe the skin tone of your white characters as well. This is something I point out to many authors when I edit. And the authors who tend to do this the most are white authors. I've noticed that they only describe the skin tone for their black or brown characters, but not for any of their white characters. Sometimes they also only share the eye color and hair color for their black or brown characters too. Doing this sets those characters apart in a not so very good way. There's a term called othering, which means to view or treat a person or group of people as intrinsically different from and alien to oneself. So when you only describe the skin tone of your black or brown characters, you are implying that they are other. Reluctance to want to describe all skin tones might make an author decide to not describe the skin tone of any of their characters. I've seen authors make statements like, I want my readers to fill in the blank and imagine my characters to be and look however my readers decide. But this doesn't work either. Why? Because the default will always be white, since white is the dominating race. Even readers who are people of color are likely to default to this because of society and how people of color are underrepresented, from our movies and TV shows to commercials and advertisements, and of course, in books. I will admit that I had unconsciously done this in older works that I published, and it is something that can be done and is usually done unconsciously, not intentionally. The important thing is that we learn and make a conscious effort moving forward to do better. Don't use food descriptors to describe the skin tone of your characters of color. You may not be intending to offend anyone when you use food to describe the skin tone of a person of color, but your intent and your impact are two different things. It can still impact people of color in a way you didn't intend. Again, I will admit that I had once used cocoa and latte to describe skin tone before. Now, those uses make me cringe. But also, now, I know better. Now I am aware and considerate when I describe my characters of color. I want to sidestep to a different but related topic for a moment about hair color and eye color. You can use food descriptors for hair and eye color because it's not hair color or eye color that has been used as a reason to discriminate against people. There are several reasons why it's not a good idea to use food to describe a black or brown character or person in real life. First, it fetishizes them. Often, foods in relation to darker skin tones are sensualized, like the use of chocolate and how it's usually connected to cravings. If you think about it, foods are eaten, consumed, which when used to describe skin can indicate desire in a way that is uncomfortable and dehumanizing. Two, it's become a cliche. Many best-selling white authors, especially romance authors from the 80s and 90s, had used words like chocolate, caramel, brown sugar, honey, and latte to describe skin tone. So much so that if you read those books, it became ingrained as a detailed way to describe skin tone, without realizing it's not appropriate because, likely, those authors at that time hadn't realized it either. 3. History is another reason why using these foods as descriptors for skin is problematic. Coffee was one of the most important crops behind enforced labor during the slave trade. And even nowadays, cocoa production involves child slave labor. One article I read said that using spices, like nutmeg, to describe skin tone isn't seen by many people of color in the same way as using a food item. Even so, I encourage caution to make sure it doesn't sound or can't be perceived as fetishizing, and also isn't a spice from their culture. You may be wondering about describing white characters with food descriptors, and if that's fine, like milky white skin or peaches and cream. While those can be used in a sensual way, white people don't have the same history as people of color. Women have been fetishized, but white people have not. It's really up to you, but I would suggest not using food for any character's skin tone moving forward. Also, it is different if a person of color chooses to do this within their race. For example, a black author using a line about chocolate in their story to describe a character, spoken by another black character, versus when a white author does this. So what words can you use? These are just a handful of terms you can use to describe skin tone. You can find more online, but always stop and consider if it could be offensive. Copper could be fine, but don't add like a penny because that could imply a price that is offensive. Note that olive is a technical and appropriate term associated with light to moderately tan skin and can have green, yellow, or golden undertones. Tan and naturally tan, or natural tan, are two different things because when you use the word tan, it's usually white tan or sun tanned, meaning a white person with a tan that is pictured. Whereas a natural tan is one that does not come from the sun and is a skin tone for a person of color. Also, it is completely fine to describe someone's skin as brown, but you could add more details since brown has a vast shade range. For example, golden brown or russet brown. Along the terms of what is appropriate and what's not appropriate in regards to race, you can say a character is black with a capital B when using it to refer to a person, not their color, their skin color. Black generally describes a person of African or Caribbean descent. Using African American in an effort to be polite, as has been the belief for many years, may be an assumption because the person in fact may not be American. Don't use redskin for Native Americans. Redskins is a derogatory word that had been used interchangeably with savages. The use of Indian for people native to America is also incorrect. Christopher Columbus thought he had reached the Indian Ocean when he came to North America. That's why he called the natives Indians. For historical stories, this is tricky since the term was used back then. For narration, you could use Native Americans in its place. As for modern usage, I suggest indigenous peoples. When referring to several nations or tribes collectively, people is plural with an S at the end because there are so many distinct and diverse groups, not just one. However, for one nation or tribe, it'd be the singular noun of people. Also, capitalize the I for indigenous when using it as an identity for a person or group of people to validate it. Capitalize it for a noun, lowercase it for an adjective. Now, there's no one-size-fits-all term that everyone will agree with. If you can be specific with a character or group of characters and use their tribe, nation, or community name instead, it's always best to do that. There's a lot of history behind East Asians being called yellow that is very negative, including discrimination, exclusion, and violence, which is why on this list for don't, I have don't use yellow for East Asians. Another don't is don't use gypsy, as this is also a slur. If you're using a word to describe a person or a group of people, you can always Google it to see if it could be potentially offensive. Don't have your characters assume someone's ethnicity or nationality based on their appearance or even their accent. A few more definitions here. Race is someone's physical traits, ethnicity is someone's cultural heritage, and nationality is where someone claims their legal citizenship of a nation state. If it's important, always have the character who is a person of color volunteer where they're from as a part of their personal story, and not from another character asking where they're from, since where are you from, just like what are you, can be offensive questions and trigger a feeling of not belonging. If there's no way for your main character to know another character's ethnicity or nationality, leave it out entirely. Don't use offensive descriptors. For example, for hair, do not use the words kinky, nappy, or dreadlocks. A brief history of dreadlocks. In the 19th century, the British had found the hairstyle of Kenyan warriors as dreadful and coined the term dreadlocks. Nowadays, you may see uses of dreads or locks. I suggest locks, which drops the negative undertones. Do avoid stereotypes. Stereotypes to avoid for a character who is black includes ghetto, dangerous criminal, abused mother, absent father, angry black woman, sassy black woman, and scary black man. Stereotypes to avoid for a character who is Asian include super smart, overachieving, the wise Asian, women are submissive, bad drivers, and calling Asian women exotic. Stereotypes to avoid for characters who are Pacific Islanders. First, do not say that they are all Hawaiian, because they're not. And also, do not say that they're all great at sports, that they're all big and fat or lazy. And of course, avoid calling Pacific Islander women exotic. For Latinx and Mexican characters, avoid these stereotypes, calling them all criminals, saying that they can't speak English well, that they're all hardworking, or on the flip side, lazy and poor. And of course, avoid that spicy Latina woman. That is a stereotype that has been used way too often. Now, a little explanation here. Latinx is gender neutral, but you can still use Latina for a character who identifies as a woman, and Latino for a character who identifies as a man. And another don't in here for stereotypes, or just something just to avoid altogether, would be for any immigrants and using the derogatory term fresh off the boat or off the boat. Don't make all the bad guys in your story black or brown. In my disaster crime series, the bad guys are all races. I do have black and brown characters who are bad guys, but at the same time I have far more white characters who are bad guys. The important thing is that you're not making all the characters who are villains or criminals as people of color, and you're not using the fact that they are black or brown as the reason why they are bad. Do seek advice from someone you know who is of the same race or ethnicity as your character to ask them if they feel something is offensive or inappropriate. And just because one person may not be offended doesn't mean another won't be. So ask multiple people. Also, you can employ the help of sensitivity readers. They're different from beta readers. Because they're reading content that could be sensitive or triggering, it is a good idea to pay them for their time and effort. If the entire manuscript doesn't need to be evaluated, but just a paragraph or line, you can ask about a short excerpt instead. Do be conscious and cautious. If you worry something might be taken the wrong way or could offend someone, don't include it. It's important for us to be aware of these things in our own writing, as well as in our thoughts and lives. No, we can't make every reader happy, but we can strive to not harm people with our written or spoken words. That's what I hope this presentation has done for you. Don't let these things scare you away from writing. Instead, I hope these tips will lead to you wanting to write more inclusive and safe stories. Since this presentation is not exhaustive, if you'd like to add something, please feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. Thank you. Bye.